Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCA's 26th monthly Zoom presentation. Our speaker today is Erika Nelson. She is an independent artist and educator, examining the nooks and crannies of the United States, seeking out the odd and unusual, gathering stories of people building roadside vernacular architecture known as the world's largest things. She developed her own traveling roadside attraction and museum featuring the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions of the world's largest things, and settled in Lucas, Kansas. Through her travels, she has written a graduate thesis titled Driving Around Looking at Big Things While Thinking About Spam, prepared a full meal utilizing foil and her automobile's radiator and heat manifold, stood on a sideshow performer lying on a bed of nails, accompanied a genuine Kansas cowboy at the last functioning 10-in-1 sideshow in Coney Island, and many other adventures too numerous to mention. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Erika. Erika, if you would please unmute yourself and tell us about your show.
Happy to, Brian, and thank you so much. So I tend to make image-heavy presentations. So this will be a whirlwind tour through roadside attractions and some of my other seemingly divergent, but really parallel lines of inquiry when I'm driving around on this American road. Tonight's presentation is biggest, smallest, biggest, because that's the easiest way to remember that the end result of all my work has been the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions, the world's largest things, but we'll get to that in a bit. So, all right, there we go. Look at that. It's working. So you might know from the crazy hair and the very loud open mouth, which one is me. I've been interested in roadside attractions since I was a little kid. Visiting Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox whenever we'd see my Minnesota grandparents. And then whenever we'd get home to Missouri, I knew I was reaching home whenever I saw the great 8-ball water tower in Tipton, Missouri, out the back of the AMC Gremlin that we used to take road trips in. So growing up, I thought that this is how people navigated. You navigate by what is big and awesome out the rear window. When I grew up to be an adult and grew dissatisfied with the American dream, I found out that not everybody navigates that way, but that didn't mean that I couldn't. So at some point, after being a graphic designer at a television station, I sold everything I owned, moved into a transit bus, which you see there in the white, and decided to revisit what I fell in love with in my formative years. So I got out an atlas, I started circling all the things that I was interested in, and that's how I sort of formed my early travels when I lived on the road. One of those early travels was to Lucas, Kansas, which is home to one of the oldest visionary self-made worlds, art environments. And eventually my travels brought me through to here and also let me land here after living in a vehicle for 2 years. And now I live right next door to this amazing site. But this is a presentation about big things. So we won't be talking about these environments just yet. But you'll see they pop up an awful lot on those travels. I see amazing things like the Beer Can House down in Houston whenever I'd go to art car parades down there. Or driving along through Idaho, I'd screech the bus to a halt whenever I saw a giant miner's cap made in a restaurant in the shape of a miner's hat. Or Wall Drug is famous not just for the free ice water, but the giant dinosaurs that really marked the way. And I knew at some point that these were the things that were interesting to me, more so than the career that I thought I needed to have and the degrees that I got that I still appreciate very much, but were leading to an institutionalized system that didn't think about these things that I was so passionate about. So while I was living on the road, I had an epiphany. These were the things I really loved. And not all of these things had appropriate souvenirs. They would have maybe cups and moccasins and fudge, but they weren't, the really interesting things didn't have small versions of their big things. So this is sort of where that concept started. I was making souvenirs for myself and eventually adding them to a collection. And while I was living in a bus, I kept them small. And at some point, it occurred to me that I could do a traveling sort of circus with these amazing stories that I was collecting. So while I was on the road, I would camp out in one or two spots for days at a time and started painting my vehicle that I was living in into a roadside attraction to house the collection. So these are early shots. You can tell by the black sections or the text areas that weren't filled in yet. And I finally ended up with the first mobile museum that did house the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions of the world's largest things. Now, I know I keep saying that fast, so I'll break it down for you. I go to the site of a world's largest thing, like this world's largest baseball bat in Louisville, Kentucky. I photograph it, I gather its background story, and then I make a world's smallest version of that world's largest thing, and I add it to the collection. And eventually, I realized that I had a big enough collection that I could call it a world's largest collection. And so the superlatives just naturally compounded into the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions of the world's largest things. The first version was just a mobile museum, and my inaugural tour was in 2003 of California sites. I was still living in the bus full time, but the items were displayed in the passenger side windows, so I could go up to the newest big thing and simultaneously show the last bits of big things that I saw on my way. One of my very first and most amazing stops is at Salvation Mountain, built by Leonard Knight. And I included this one because he too knew the power of a replica. And he has his own small version of his mountain right there that he was going to send up to a museum. And Leonard's no longer with us, but he ended up being a mentor in those early on the road years. And it included sites like the Cabazon dinosaurs, before they were overtaken by creationists that changed them into museums about creationism as opposed to celebrating the dinosaurs like Claude Bell had originally made. It included the world's largest olive in Lindsay, California, which you can get your head stuck in. And I know that because I did get my head stuck in that olive, to the delight of the cafe right next door, who was watching the whole thing. Or the world's largest box of raisins at the Sun-Made plant. And I started thinking about why people make these things. And I started to categorize them because I was trained in academia. And so if something is interesting, I end up really wanting to know as much as I can about it. But since nobody had studied them yet, I could make up my own rules for them. But they kind of naturally fell into these different kinds of world's largest things. Some are made for advertising. Some are civic monuments celebrating a town. Some are left over from World's Fairs exhibitions. Some used to be functional big things, but then because of their size are no longer functional, but become a tourist attraction. Some celebrate industry of the area. Some are created by lone eccentrics. And some are naturally occurring, like the world's largest sycamore tree stump in Kokomo, Indiana. And in addition to the kinds or the motivations behind those things, there's also different forms. So they can take the form of an amassing, which just means putting a bunch of small like things together into a ball or a wad or a pile. You can make them out of concrete. There's a whole section called ducks, and I'll tell you why in a moment. I think SCA members all know why a duck is a duck. There are ones made out of fiberglass. There are some made out of metal. There are some that are painted water towers and some that are made out of wood. So even just starting with the classification system made another layer for me to investigate and record. So for example, this world's largest ball of rubber bands, which is a title that gets stolen really quickly. So it is not a current world's largest, but this is one I encountered in Delaware. This would be an example of an amassing and also one made by a lone eccentric. I promised I'd tell you about ducks. Ducks refer to any building that's shaped like a thing. And usually that thing that it's shaped like is the reason for the building's existence. And they're all named ducks because of a very early example of this kind of mimetic architecture that mimics an object. And all of those mimetic architectures can be called ducks because of this 1931 example built by Martin Muir that was selling ducks. It still exists today, but that also means that you can create some confusion in your presentations by calling anything shaped like what it sells a duck. For example, this gas pump in King City, Missouri, while it is also a world's largest gas pump, it is also a duck because it's a building shaped like a thing. That duck is still in existence and now serves as a museum dedicated to mimetic architecture, and one of the few that I haven't seen yet. Here's another mimetic architecture example from Kentucky, Bonder and Strug store. No longer a pharmacy, so I'm not sure if there's like a molting duck designation that we could put for those that no longer serve their shaped purpose, but we'll have to, as a group, figure out where to put those. I mentioned water towers shaped like things. One of my favorites is the world's largest ketchup bottle in Collinsville, Illinois, shaped like a thing. And here's a super secret awesome thing of traveling with your own models. You can, once you've made your model, then take a meta photo of your model with a world's largest thing whenever you visit it again. So that was also really informing some of those early tours. It wasn't just seeing the thing, wasn't just collecting the story, but then going back again once the model's done to meta-ize the superlatives. There are some really beautiful ones out there. This is a Corten steel doctor's bag in Wilmington, Delaware, that is just an amazing, beautiful example of what some of these monuments can look like. And this one, appropriately, is sitting right outside of a hospital. One of my favorite lone eccentrics making world's largest things would be Ken Nyberg up in Vining, Minnesota. And I think he'd be okay with me calling him an eccentric. I know him now, but I was brought to him through his work. And he was a welder. He knew that he could make almost anything, so somebody challenged him to make a pouring coffee cup. And he took up his shop sweepings, welded them together, and you can see all of his objects are made out of scrap material and scrap metal. And once he made one object, he started making more. And when he started, Vining, Minnesota was down to only 30 or 40 people. But people started stopping to see these world's largest things and started navigating by them. And once people started stopping, they realized that they had something good there. And the gas station reopened. The gas station then expanded to include a grocery store. And the town doubled in size to 80 people. I mean, that is the power of a world's largest thing. But there are also great whimsical forms like this very classic clothespin, or the alien scratching his head, just beautiful work. One of the other examples of a water tower is this can of fruit cocktail in Sunnyvale, California. And this is an example of an industry building a water tower to advertise what they are doing within their own factory setting. This one is now in the middle of an office park as opposed to the factory setting because the Libby's plant went away, but everybody loved that water tower so much it became part of the fabric of Sunnyvale. Some of the oldest ones are on the East Coast, and one of the oldest ones standing would be Lucy the Margate elephant. She was one of 3 elephants built on the East Coast. There was one in Coney Island, one in Cape May, and one in Margate City. And Lucy, the one on the left there, is the only one who made it into the 1900s. The other 2 burned before the year 1900. Lucy, you could see, was in pretty rough shape, but in the 80s, a group formed to say, hey, you know what, this is an amazing thing, not like any other. So we really need to band together. And they formed a Save Lucy committee. And if you love big things, you also love the shots of big things moving slowly with crowds around them. And this is a wonderful shot of Lucy making her magic move to her new spot just a couple blocks away to be fully restored. And she is still a monument today to be enjoyed by thousands. She is a wood framed, tin skinned construction, 3 stories high. You go up a spiral staircase in one of her rear legs into a cathedral room. And if you crawl up into her head, her eyes are glass and look out over the ocean. So this is a view out of one of Lucy's eyes. You can go on up to the howdah. And because this is a building shaped like a thing, I usually ask the crowd if I'm in person, so what do you call this? And they usually say a duck because they learned their lesson. And then I will correct them and say, no, that is an elephant's butt. There are also constructions celebrating industries of the area that are made by cities. So Albert the Bull is one of my favorite examples of this from Audubon, Iowa. It was a big meat shipping area, meat on the hoof. And the JCs, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, decided they needed to commemorate their place in history with a giant bull. And this is why you have to stop and get the stories, because in those presentations, they don't always show you how they're built. And those are usually the best stories because the reasons why are usually pretty obvious, but the stories of how they got there are fabulous. So this is sections of metal frame sort of inserted over a steel I-beam section. And one time when I was visiting and asking for more stories, they said, well, a lot of those sections were old windmills. So they would call their neighbors and see if there's any people not using their windmills anymore. And they would go and tear down any that were donated and then incorporate them into Albert the Bull, which means that it truly was a community-based project. But every once in a while, there were some windmills that hadn't really been donated. They got the address wrong, but took the windmill anyway, and they too would be incorporated into this monument. Then it was covered in chicken wire and stucco and a beautiful paint job. And Albert the Bull is there for Audubon, Iowa to continue to enjoy. He is also anatomically correct. So there is a part of his anatomy that often gets painted yearly by high schoolers. And I'm sure you know exactly what part that might be because he is a bull, not a steer. Minnesota is a hotbed of these. You'll have the world's largest turkey in Frazee, Minnesota, the world's largest booming prairie chicken in Rothsay, Minnesota, the world's largest loon in Vargas, Minnesota. There's the world's largest deer in Deer Creek. There's the world's largest foot, once again, Ken Nyberg's inviting. There's the world's largest otter in Fergus Falls. And there's the world's Falls version of the world's largest otter from Fergus Falls, visiting the world's largest otter in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. There are sometimes multiple big things in one region. For example, Long Beach, Washington is the home of the world's largest squirting clam. They used to have a clam bake every year, but they also created the world's largest frying pan where they would do the world's largest clam fry in that frying pan. They would also set it down before the big fry so that the clam queens could ride in the giant frying pan down the middle of the street during the parade on the way to the clam festival grounds. One year for a promotion, Long Beach sent their giant frying pan around the state of Washington. And at the site of the world's largest egg, they laid down the pan to make the world's largest omelet at the world's largest egg. And they had that year's egg queen strap bacon onto her feet, step into the pan and grease the pan for the world's largest omelet with bacon feet. And this is why, again, you have to go to the places and get the stories, because somebody told me this story. I did not believe it until they showed the picture of Mrs. Bacon Feet. And this is one of my favorite examples of when worlds collide in world's largest things. And you can see that Long Beach text on that panhandle there. So the craziest stories are often the ones that are all the way true. There's another egg up in Canada, a Ukrainian egg. There's another, the Winlock, Washington egg is where the clam queen and clam pan collided to make the big egg, the big omelet. There's also a large egg in Mentone, Indiana. And all of these have different reasons for being. Either they're egg centers or egg capitals or cultural capitals. And I was giving a presentation similar to this in a town just south of me, Wilson, Kansas, and I knew that they are home to one of the oldest traditional Czech egg painters here in the States. So as a sort of way to generate ideas within their town, I said, well, what would happen if you built the world's largest Czech egg here in honor of Kepka Belton? Gave him a little bit of a mock-up and didn't think about it too much until 5 years later when a billboard showed up on the interstate saying, coming soon, world's largest Czech egg. And then a couple years later, this is the result of their civic pride in their heritage and their want to really stand out from the crowd. So planting those little seeds can really go a long way, and they've really taken this idea and run with it. I've been doing this for a while, and it's come in a bunch of different forms, but one of the highlights was getting featured in a Zippy the Pinhead cartoon, and I did contact Bill Griffith and ask if Zippy would be on my board of directors, and he said yes. Bill Griffith isn't, but Zippy is on my advisory board. I've popped up in Ripley's Believe It or Not as a little cartoon because it's a catchy little jig, and I have my own Topps Allen and Ginter trading card. So I've made it into a couple of baseball packs. So even though I took a route that wasn't into the institutionalized art world, I somehow ended up there anyway. Part of it's been through driving art cars. This is my little art car Scout. The bus only got about 9 miles per gallon, so it retired pretty early. But I still wanted to see these things. And the best way to make people open up to you and tell you about their stuff is to drive something crazy so that they have a reason to talk to you and you can tell them what you're interested in. So I did a trip out west to be on Conan O'Brien with the little art car, stopped at Wigwam Village in Holbrook, Arizona along the way. The car was supposed to be on TV with me, but it was not. So it was just me and Conan talking about some big things. Christmas Eve, so not a whole lot of people were watching, but that's okay by me. Got to talk about the world's largest hairball, which pissed off the museum who had it because they had already moved it to the back. But after this aired, people kept asking, where's the big hairball? And they had to bring it back up front. In case you didn't know, cows lick themselves just like cats do, but they can't hork it up. So in the slaughtering process, giant hairballs come out of their stomachs. And in Garden City, Kansas, one of the world's largest cow hairballs was produced and donated to that historical society. And that's the one you see there. That's about the size of a basketball. So I ended up getting into pop culture anyway, and also into the very art magazines that I was trying to subvert by not doing that normal institutional route. So the art cars ended up being included in museum shows. I got a great review in Art Forum, which for an artist is like, ah! But I didn't let that stop me from keeping on these paths that intersect. So there's the art car at Lucy. I visit these over and over and over again. So anytime I'm in New Jersey, it means I'm seeing Lucy. Anytime I'm in California, I'll go and see the Cabazon dinosaurs. Anytime I get a new vehicle, eventually it becomes an art car. Like this is the very first excursion for the Jeep, which would turn into a Jeep-elope. But again, they go round and round into these parallel journeys. Anytime there's a chance for a road trip, it means there's a chance to see more big things. So this is sort of the process of how the art cars happen. They build on each other layer by layer. Each of them usually features a big map of what's large where you can see the US and see all the dots where there's a world's largest thing located. And for the Jeep-elope, I did go back to that very first idea of having some of those miniatures in the windows as a mobile display. So it's easier to talk about what I'm doing while I'm on the road. So that one ended up debuting in Baltimore at a festival that celebrated John Waters and Everything Awesome. So this is sort of a sketchbook collection of the things that I saw along the way, like the giant peachoid in Clanton, Alabama. I was delivering a miniature version of a miniature golf course to a show in Florida that's fully playable with little tiny balls and little tiny pucks. That's a replica of the Goonie golf chain. So even when it's not a world's largest thing, there's still this love of making things small, but also interactive. So here's somebody playing through one of those Goonie golf holes. And that has now come home to me to the expo. But it's a way to, again, tell the stories while you're gathering the stories. Here's the Jeepalope at the Jimmy Carter Peanut in Plains, Georgia, where he was teaching Sunday school up until just recently, or visiting the Shell gas station in Winston-Salem, or the Superman in Metropolis, Illinois. And these often get combined into new artworks, sometimes just documenting along the way. Here's a giant John Waters that was part of Artscape Baltimore when I was there. Visiting the Duncan Fife chair in North Carolina, or the big basket building in that was the former Longaberger's headquarters. All of these only are there because I drive around all the time looking for them. And each one is an excuse to revisit. There's the big bat again. I visited again after 15 years. And that bat's influence has sort of carried over to some of the other downtown buildings. You can see past the bat, there's a big baseball that has whammed into one of the other buildings. And even farther down the street, there's another world's largest bat, but it's a flying bat tucked up and asleep on a costume shop. So they really do have influence. There's the dinosaurs again, because I love them. The Holbrook dinosaur was at the Rock Shop, the Donut Hole in California, and this was on another trip out there to this time be on Rove, LA. And you'll notice that, so Rove is a comedian from Australia who ended up with an LA talk show, loved big things. His brother surprised him with a visit from me celebrating big things, because as an Australian, they have a lot of big things too. And he just loved them. I was the only person who shared his excitement. And so gave him a t-shirt, and he is here wearing my t-shirt, hugging Gary Busey. And that is probably the closest I will ever get to Gary Busey. And another drawing compilation of those trips to kind of keep them straight in my head. And the collection still travels in larger versions too. So sometimes art-wise, I get to do festivals and temporary installations. One was in a circus area. So I did a series of circus wagons that did very specialized collections that were either about Wisconsin for the Wisconsin Wonders one. This was a fermentation fest celebrating foodstuffs. So I gathered together all of the food-based small versions of big things for the Fabulous Foodstuffs booth. And then this was supposed to be related to the county that we were displaying in. So I made a special set of just Sauk County superlatives. So these were a big hit. I also took those same circus wagons to Art Prize in Michigan and changed up the collection, changed up the skins for those. Started referencing the art world again. So the sculptors who have made their living making big things like Klaus Oldenburg, Michigan sets, and an Art World Wonders set. So I keep building large ways to show these small things. And eventually my yard got full, because in between shows, the circus wagons would sit at home in the front yard. And eventually a local businessman decided, Erika probably needs a storefront. He needed a tax write-off. So there's a building setting on Main Street that he wasn't able to sell. And he approached me one day in December saying, hey, I need a tax write-off for this year. World's Largest Things is a nonprofit, correct? Yes, it is. Well, would you like a storefront? Because I would like to give it to you. And I thought about it for a bit. It's just 1/3 of this historic 1888 building. And it was home to an antique store, but had been updated in the 70s with those lovely, lovely drop ceilings and orange carpet, which wasn't really my bag, but free building, even though the roof needs some work. And so I thought about it and I did accept the gift and immediately started tearing out the ceilings, exposing some of the old framework and woodwork, some of the columns that go all the way up. And now this last 5-year journey has been trying to transform this former retail space in a historic building into the Roadside Sideshow Expo. Here's a shot that a photographer took that shows one of the few inside shots, but also taking a circus theme and really enjoying that juxtaposition of red and white coloration that you see in circus tents and the sideshow flim-flamminess of creating world's largest and those senses of wonder. This is the outside of the Roadside Sideshow Expo. Part of it is photoshopped. The duck from Flanders did not actually move here, nor do I have a dinosaur out front, but the mural is real, and as well as the text and the window displays. And the Jeepalope was often parked in front of the Roadside Sideshow Expo so people could get used to the idea of an art car and a big obnoxious bright mural about weifying things in downtown. The Sideshow Expo also sometimes ends up being used as a gallery for me, or a studio space for me. So I usually have permanent displays set up front, and then in the middle section, I'll produce the next set of traveling roadside attractions. Here, I'm working on a set of sideshow banners that are just for Kansas World's Largest Things. And you'll see the yellow section in the back is a map of Kansas that has holes in it. So then I can insert those models into the holes in the map so they appear where they are in Kansas. And that ended up being a new sideshow display that I displayed at the Smoky Hill River Festival last year. So it had the full banner front and then the Kansas map of what's large where, with the small versions of the world's largest things in the map in that middle section. And the crazy dream is I'd love to do this for every state full size, but I will need a much bigger building. And whenever I make these things, they do all come home and they do need a place to live. So the expo has become the place where once those objects have been out there and been created for a specific storytelling reason, they then come home to Lucas and find a semi-permanent home in the expo. I say semi-permanent because I still send them out to shows every once in a while. But you can see that big top tent in the middle, and that's one of my clean labs. Or there's a little bit of the banners there hanging up that are from the Kansas collection. And over my right shoulder, you'll see another big map of what's large where, which has been constant in each of the art cars, because people do love to see the things in the relation to the place. And that's really how the story of place grows. Now, I know I'm talking to the choir here, but I believe in these things so much as identity markers for towns that I tell the stories over and over again, no matter if people are listening or not. And along the way, I meet caretakers who are just as passionate, like Linda Clover, who's the caretaker for the world's largest ball of twine in Cawker City, Kansas. She bakes twine ball cakes for its birthday in August and lets people wrap new twine on that ball. Or in Greensburg, Kansas, it's the home of the world's largest hand-dug well, which began in 1887, was never able to be full of water, so immediately became a tourist attraction. And these towns with these things know that they have something special. And while the locals might not always appreciate how unique and amazing that is, there are caretakers for each one of these that love telling their stories, have told their stories to me so that I can retell them to, again, create the sense of wonder in traveling, because you don't get the same feel from a picture as you would from being there. Oh, this is a bonus at the world's largest hand-dug well. There's also the world's largest palisade meteorite, but also a new one was found. So the caretaker of the palisade meteorite had to add a little sticker to their display saying one of the. So it's a dynamic world. I absolutely love being in it. This shot is from a recent Kansas media story, Kansas Public Radio, that aired about 2 weeks ago. And while I was at the River Festival last week, it got picked up by NPR. So I got to tell this story of superlatives nationwide just last week to Morning Edition listeners. Linda Clover was a part of that story, who is that ball of twine caretaker, and the big well is part of that story. So it tells us that other people are out there who think these things are just as amazing as we do. And you can kind of get tunnel vision when you live in a small town of 400 people like I do in the geographic center of the United States. But it just takes that one outsider saying, hey, I like this too, show me more, to remind us all of why we do it. And that is why I landed here, but also why I love telling these stories of rural environments. And it all started with that first mobile museum. It's been 20 years now, which is the longest I've done anything and the longest I've lived anywhere. But it did all start with that first mobile museum that houses the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions of the world's largest things. And I would be remiss in my duties if I did not also have the world's smallest version of the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions of the world's largest things mobile museum, visiting the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions of the world's largest things mobile museum. And that is what I've got for you.
Well, thank you very much, Erika. That was amazing. In the chat, you'll see it because I'll send you the chat as well. I was laughing my head off at some of the slides. It was really quite remarkable things. Now we have a bunch of questions, and I've got a bunch of questions too. One is from Nancy. Nancy, Nancy Sturm, if you're still on the line, would you unmute yourself, please? And Nancy wanted to know about how do you support your art in your life? Nancy, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Erika, nice to hear you present again. I know you presented at SCA several years ago, and I've been fascinated by your work and mission ever since. But how can you remind us how you do support, the production of your work as well as your living? I know you do murals, but do you take charitable contributions and are you teach? And well, teaching doesn't pay anything either. So how do you live, girl?
Yeah, I know that's the hard part about being interested in so many things that are not usually monetarily well rewarded. It means I have a lot of lines in the water all the time. So the world's largest collection of the world's smallest versions of the world's largest things is my passion project. And it is a 501c3, so it does take charitable contributions, which is usually what any profit I make from my art world work, I funnel into buying a new roof for the expo for World's Largest Things. But personally, I consult for the state of Kansas now at their Creative Arts Industries Commission through the Department of Commerce. I do consulting work for towns. I speak through our state humanities council. In fact, the Humanities Kansas board will be in Lucas touring the art sites tomorrow as their board retreat. It's great living in an art town. I have not written a book. I do sometimes write for art and travel magazines. And then the large scale artworks that I do for festivals, all of that is commission work. So it is a career in the arts. Oh, and I do preservation of visionary art environments. So after being here for about 10 years, we ended up getting to restore the Garden of Eden, which I live next to, that great, crazy, awesome cement sculpture. And that was with a crew through a foundation in Wisconsin. I've gotten to be on their preservation crews 2 or 3 different times, and that takes me to different states. And that led to some surface work preservation that we're sort of on call for. So every once in a while, you'll get a call out of the blue saying, hey, you want to go to Utah for 2 months? We need some help. So we'll go out to Utah, do some work, and come back. And those paying gigs are what sustain the exploration. But this is something that I said at a university once that I think people forget to say. I don't have any debt. So did not, I did not have many student loans, or the ones that I did, I paid off quickly. And the properties that I buy are the ones that nobody else wants. So I can usually save up cash to buy them, including the house I live in. The house that I live in, I bought for $4,000.
Oh my God.
Well, you're an inspiration and just terrific. Thank you so much for sharing all this with us again tonight.
But that really makes a big difference. If you're only paying for the next thing and not all the last things, it means that you can have a much freer life. And that is not something I think we talk about enough to people going through school now. And it's a much different world, but that's really what makes it sustainable, is that I live very much in my means, which sometimes means a lot of really bad food.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Now, we got a whole bunch of questions about the collection itself. Barbara Gossett asks, is the alien sculpture, which you showed near the beginning of the presentation, is the alien sculpture in Roswell, New Mexico?
No, that was a Ken Nyberg one, but there's a great set in Roswell too. And I haven't replicated everything. Whenever I do one of those maps, I not only show where the big things are, I show if I've seen it or not. And then if I have a replica done, I make that dot even a different color. So at a glance, I can tell from my maps which ones I've seen, which ones I have a replica done, and which ones I've seen but are waiting. And I have not yet replicated any of the alien invasion ones, but there's a good section in my pictures file of just the supernatural and otherworldly visitation sites.
Okay, great. Now, Bill Swislow, are you still online, Bill? Because you had a very interesting
Sure.
question. Can you ask
Sure.
your first question and then maybe also talk about your presentation coming up in next year?
So I had two questions. One was, Erica, one was, you mentioned Klaus Oldenburg, but I wonder if he's sort of too formally trained arty to fit comfortably in your world. That's one question. I'll let you answer that one.
Well, I love Oldenburg stuff because that was one of the few things in going through art school, the one that still created a sense of wonder. And I was always sort of taken aback by how easily people dismissed them because they're too accessible. And it's like, but I mean, how could you not love giant shuttlecocks at the Nelson Atkins? So I do have a section that is just Klaus Oldenburg. So he has his own display set too in the expo, and the display set is one of the constructions that he built as a gallery space. He had a mouse-shaped gallery space that he had in proposals for a long time. So I took his drawings and extruded that into a cardboard shelf system that's sitting upright, and that has, I think, 4 different Klaus Oldenburg small versions in just a tribute to him and his explorations.
Hey, that's great. I actually saw the Mouse Museum in 1977 when it was at the MCA in Chicago, and it had a huge influence on validating the kind of stuff I was starting to get interested in collecting. So I'm all for that. So that's a great answer, better than I thought. And then the other question was about Casey, Illinois, which you didn't mention. Sort of the same thing. I mean, I jumped to, well, is Casey, Illinois too systematic for her? Or it was just accidental that you didn't mention the huge collection of allegedly world's largest things there?
I love Casey, Illinois, and the only reason they didn't make it into here is that I feel like I need to go back, because when I visited, it was early on in the town really thinking about what they were doing. So they were doing a lot of kind of big things and then kind of backtracked and was like, oh, well, all right, we need to differentiate between which are going to certified and which are just big. So in watching the way that they've changed the way that they're marketing, but also that explosion and really embracing it. I love Casey's displays. I've only gotten to be there 3 times. And the last time was raining, so I didn't get super great shots. And that's really the only reason that they weren't in the presentation.
Okay, well, that's good. So positive answers where I was expecting something negative. So all for that. And then
It's hard to get me to say something bad about a world's largest thing.
yeah, I would think so. And then per Brian's point, in January, I think on what, January 18th, is it, Brian?
I actually don't have the schedule open in front of me right
Let's see.
now, but
Yes,
something
January
like that.
18th. Yeah, January 18th for SCA, I'll be doing a Zoom on visionary art environments, but with the focus on the ones that had some kind of commercial intention behind them. So like Possum Trot in California, and so on and so forth. So just wanted to tout that for people interested in those kind of artists, self-taught artist-made art environments, of which there are, of course, many, many.
Excellent. Yeah, I will definitely be tuning in for that one because those are also some of my favorites.
Great, thanks, Bill, and we'll look forward to that one too. We have a couple of questions from Juliana Verburt. Hopefully I'm saying that properly. Juliana, are you still online? I'll ask the first one.
Yes, I am. Yeah, and that was a good job on the last name. Is Verbort. Yeah,
Oh,
very good.
Thank you. Juliana had asked which state has the most largest things?
It's kind of tied between Texas, Minnesota, and California. And with the numbers fluctuate because sometimes people get tired of the world's largest thing and they eat it or they destroy it or it dies from neglect. But it's usually one of those three and they kind of pass the title around. Texas makes sense because everything's bigger in Texas. California has the mentality of Hollywood and celebrating those facades and the whimsy and knowing the commercial appeal of mimetic architecture. And Minnesota, I think it's because of the sense of humor that they're so introverted that when you have a big personality stuck in an introvert's body, it comes out in the form of a world's largest thing.
Interesting. Now, Juliana, you had another good question here. Maybe you'd like to ask them about the functionality of these installations.
Yeah, I was just wondering how many of these have any kind of a purpose or a function other than being available for people to climb on them or climb up inside of them. You know, how many of them house businesses or stores? Here, I live in Tacoma, Washington, and we have a giant coffee pot called Bob's Java Jive, which is actually a bar.
Yep, been there, heard the story about the monkeys.
Okay.
A lot of the buildings are occupied. It is getting harder to find ones that have the original intent within. So last time I was in Bakersfield, California, there's a shoe repair shop inside of a shoe. I do not know if that is still functioning as a shoe shop. The Big Tamale is no longer a tamale place. The donut holes, the drive-through donut hole is still a donut shop. So percentage-wise, I'm not super sure, but it would be kind of limited to the buildings, unless you think about the amassings as being visual recycling. And I think those are active. So the ball of twine that we have in Kansas is an active participatory thing. So while it might not be a business that lives in it, it's a living, breathing, interactive thing that has really shaped that town.
That's a really good point. An interesting way of thinking about it as an ongoing interactive artwork, community artwork. I think Weed, California has tremendous potential for a large, giant thing that could be a drive-through service for folks.
Yeah. Largest drive-through doobie would be great.
Yeah.
Juliana also asked a question which I think everybody wants to know, including myself. Do you have an online version of the museum, photos of the smallest, largest things?
I do have a very old website. It's sort of a legacy website. The information's still good, but the design is awful. Again, one of those things that I'll address. So I'm most active on Facebook, World's Largest Things. Just search for that and Lucas, and you'll find what I'm working on next. But I do think that is what I need to do with the website itself, is create sort of an interactive one that links to not just my stories of collecting the information, but those town stories. And it does exist. It does not exist in the bright, beautiful form I have in my head yet.
Okay. I'll answer your question, Juliana, about viewing the recording at the end of the presentation, but we have a good question here from Dean Milano. Dean, are you still online? Do you want to ask the question yourself? Maybe Dean's gone. I'll ask it. Do you consider your models realistic miniatures or folk art?
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, I saw some of Erika's models, and I'm a model builder myself. I have thousands of models, and I love miniatures. And I was wondering, your baseball bat with the buildings. In fact, I recognize the building kits, those HO scale building kits that I have myself, and those are realistic. They're beautiful. Your ketchup bottle, I would consider that more folk art, the way you've done that. So, do you have a specific aim when you're doing a miniature of doing it as a realistic piece or a folk art piece?
Well, and that's why there is a distinction between models and versions, which is why I'm always careful to say models. I mean, versions. Ah.
Oh.
Because I'm trying to embody the spirit of the thing versus a super realistic replica of an object.
Right.
Because I also feel like you could do that now with 3D printing. And
Yeah.
I am not liked by most model builders because of that. There's no uniform scale in them. Sometimes they're made out of appropriate materials. Sometimes the materials reflect how the big thing is built, but sometimes it's an alteration of a different object that gets recombined in a new way. So it's much more of a playful, childlike amassing of objects to tell a story than I think what traditional model makers might do.
And I would consider that more folk art than realistic modeling, folk art, which I love both. They're both great, you know. So that's my question.
Thanks.
Great. Erika, yeah, you're still there. Okay, but Dean, you know what? That sounds, you have thousands of models. You might be a candidate for a Zoom presentation sometime. How does that go?
I've been in one of your journals already. I don't know if you know that or not.
Oh, I didn't know that, but that doesn't matter. There's lots of people who watch these things that don't get the journal. Now, anyways, I'm going to put your name down, so you may be hearing from me about that.
Okay.
Erika, I had a couple of questions. First of all, I just wanted to say that my favorite thing in your collection is the mini golf thing. So mini golf is already a miniature version of golf, and then you have a mini version or a smallest version of mini golf. Where did you find that thing, or who made that up?
It was a call for project proposals for a miniature golf show that was in a museum, and the museum was in Boca Raton, Florida. There are a lot of mini golf courses there. So in loving history and loving mini golf chains, I thought, well, it'd be fun to do a replica of a real chain. And so I got to visit 2 or 3 of the Goonie golfs, take photos of all of the holes, and then picked the most popular 9 to do for a replica course. And it just doesn't make sense unless it's playable, because the show wanted playable holes and I wanted a playable thing afterwards. And before COVID, that was one of the most interactive things in the expo. And the weird part was, once I delivered it to the show, on the way back home, there was a Goonie golf that was open. So I played through the big ones, which was just mind warping because I'd spent 3 months making these small versions of exactly these same things. And the problems with some of the holes where they don't quite go where they're supposed to, or the sculpture is awkward enough that it gets stuck in between some feet, happens in the big versions too. So it was a really good sort of proof of concept.
Wow, that's crazy. Now, I also wanted to ask you, you showed quite a bit of art, that your sketches that you've done in your sketchbooks. Are you the artist? You're the one that does the sketching? You're a very good artist. You should think about publishing those as well. That would make a great guidebook across the US of your sketches.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I was highly impressed.
Yeah, I do have a terminal degree in art, so I don't get to participate in the folk art world, but I do study it, and yeah, but I've tried not to let those advanced degrees change the way that I react to the art world or the way I represent it.
Okay. And last question from me, anyways, is how big is your collection? I mean, is it growing and bursting out the seams of your storefront there?
Yeah, and even though they're small, they take up a lot of room because I keep making bigger displays for them because I really do want a giant map with holes in it so everything can be placed where it's supposed to be.
Oh, yeah.
But I know that's not realistic. And the number of models changes too, either with disaster and floods or children eating parts of them, but they're usually around 200.
That's crazy.
Choking
What?
hazard.
Yeah, choking hazard, right. Are kids less than 3 years old allowed into your museum?
Yes, they are, but I have put up more plexiglass to save that from happening.
Okay. All right. Well, this is all the questions that we have on the chat. There's a whole bunch of comments here. Just everybody's just loving your presentation. So you can read those all when I send it to you. Now, anybody that's listening, we still have 42 people listening. By the way, there are 54 participants, 54 people listening to your project or to your presentation tonight. Anybody else got anything they'd like to say before we say goodnight? Just unmute yourself and go crazy. No? Okay. Well, I think we got through all the questions. There was a lot of good questions there. I just want to thank you again, Erika, for an excellent presentation. I was just, I muted everybody, including myself, because you would have been drowned out by all the laughter during the thing. Some of those pieces are so funny. It's fantastic.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'd like to remind everyone about next month's presentation, which is Gregory Smith. And his presentation will be called Fellow Travelers, the Society for Commercial Archaeology and Texas Roadside Architecture. And that is a joint presentation with Preservation Houston. Now, tonight's presentation, like everyone that's been in the series, will be available on the SCA website. And our webmaster, Ron Laducer, gets them up like right away. So it'll probably be up tomorrow or the next day at the latest. Generally, they're kept to SCA members only. That's one of the privileges of membership. But I think he keeps it open. Ron, are you going to let other people watch it, or is that going to be strictly for SCA people? Yeah, he's going to let anybody watch it. So for the person who asked, Juliana, for the person that asked about who can watch it, it'll be available for anyone. And of course, as I said before, those who are not members that watch tonight will be getting an email from me. It won't be for a week, unfortunately, because I'm going to the conference, the SCA conference in New York City tomorrow. And so I'm going to be tied up there. So without further ado, thanks again, Erika. An excellent presentation tonight. And I would like to bid everyone a good night.